In the spring of 1982, as the harsh winter finally began to recede from the Ozark Hills of Missouri, a social worker named Margaret Wilson was asked to visit an isolated cabin in Shannon County. What Margaret found there would forever change her understanding of social isolation and the chilling consequences of institutional neglect in rural America. The property, the home of the Shelton family, was nearly 30 kilometers from the nearest town, accessible only by a dirt road that often became impassable during the spring rains. The Sheltons had lived virtually without contact with the outside world for over 3 decades. Margaret's visit was motivated by an anonymous complaint received by the Missouri Department of Social Services, alleging that children were living in unhealthy conditions and possibly suffering abuse. Upon arriving at the property, Margaret was met by Elijah Shelton, 47. He was a man of medium build, a graying beard, and intense blue eyes that seemed to carry the weight of generations of isolation. Elijah lived in the wooden cabin with his sister, Martha Shelton, 43, and 3 children: Thomas, Dosi, Sadi, Nueve, and little Jacob, just 5 years old. The cabin was primitive: 2 rooms, a kitchen, a living room, with no electricity or running water. Isolation was almost total, with only occasional trips to town for necessary supplies. During her initial inspection, Margaret noticed that the children showed signs of light malnutrition and a complete lack of basic medical care. Thomas had a badly healed scar on his arm from an axe accident. Sadi had untreated strabismus. Jacob, the youngest, showed clear signs of delay in cognitive development. But what truly caught Margaret's attention were the physical similarities between the children and the 2 adults. They all shared striking features: the same intense blue eyes, the same facial bone structure, characteristics that suggested not just kinship, but a very close consanguinity. When Margaret asked about the children's mother, Elijah hesitated before claiming his wife had died during Jacob's delivery. Martha, meanwhile, remained silent, deliberately avoiding the social worker's gaze. It was then that Margaret knew the story made no sense. County records revealed no wedding certificate for Elijah Shelton. The only documents found were the birth certificates of Elijah and Martha, and an old land deed. The children had no official birth certificates. The Shelton family's isolation had intensified after Elijah and Martha's parents died tragically in a fire years earlier. Since then, the siblings had cut almost every bond with the local community, fueling Margaret's first, terrifying suspicion that Martha, not a phantom wife, was the biological mother of the children. If you want to follow more cases like this, which shake society as a whole and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel now so as not to lose any investigation. The formal investigation of the Shelton case began a week after Margaret Wilson's initial visit. The Department of Social Services, along with the Sheriff's Department, sent a full team: Margaret, a pediatrician, Dr. Robert Hayes, and a county officer. The first obstacle was Elijah's resistance. When confronted with direct questions about the origin of the children, he grew defensive and hostile. "We take care of ours," he repeated, a phrase that would later prove loaded with disturbing meaning. Martha remained silent, answering only in single words, while the children demonstrated a mix of curiosity and fear toward the visitors. Dr. Hayes performed basic physical examinations and observed several worrying signs. Beyond the malnutrition and lack of preventive care, he noticed physical characteristics consistent with endogamy, or inbreeding. Thomas had polydactyly, an extra finger on his left hand. Jacob presented cognitive impairment more severe than initially thought. These signs, when observed together, added to the shared physical characteristics and family isolation, raised serious concerns about possible consanguinity, Dr. Hayes explained in his report. The investigation took a crucial turn when the team accessed Martha's few existing medical records. The records showed a pattern. Martha had been treated at different regional hospitals in 1970, 1973, and 1977 years corresponding approximately to the children's ages. In each instance, she used different names, but medical data confirmed it was the same person. On one visit in 1970, a doctor noted she was 3 months pregnant, yet no birth or adoption record followed. Then, a crucial witness emerged. Sarah, an 83-year-old neighbor who had been friends with Elijah and Martha's mother. Sarah revealed that she had tried to maintain contact after the parents' death. Harold kept the family isolated, Sarah said. He told them the world was corrupt, and they could only trust in their own blood. Sarah revealed that on one visit in 1971, she noticed Martha was visibly pregnant. When she questioned Elijah, he expelled her from the property, forbidding a return. Sarah lamented, "The system does not take good care of ours here." Sarah's testimony provided important context, but the ultimate proof lay in an unexpected discovery. Elijah and Martha's parents, Harold and Edith Shelton, were first cousins. This meant that the incestuous relationship between Elijah and Martha was not just a tragic anomaly, but the intensification of a generational standard of endogamy. The team now understood the theory. Elijah and Martha, already products of a consanguineous relationship and indoctrinated with isolationist beliefs, established an incestuous relationship after their parents' deaths, resulting in their 3 children. However, Elijah, sensing the direction of the investigation, blocked all further entry. The legal system, without concrete evidence of abuse that justified an invasive intervention, reached an impasse that would last several months. The real breakthrough in the Shelton case occurred 6 months after the investigation began. During a routine visit, Margaret Wilson noticed that Jacob, the youngest, had a high fever and a severe respiratory infection. Despite Elijah's initial resistance, Margaret convinced him to allow Jacob to be taken to a hospital in West Plains. At the hospital, Dr. Michael Brennan, a genetic specialist, performed more in-depth tests with Elijah's reluctant consent. The results of Jacob's exams revealed multiple congenital anomalies that, together, formed a consistent pattern with a high degree of consanguinity. The genetic markers we are observing here, Dr. Brennan informed the team, are typical of children born in relationships between first-degree siblings. During the 2 weeks of Jacob's hospitalization for pneumonia, Martha remained constantly by his side, demonstrating striking maternal care and anxiety. It was during this period that Martha, exhausted and emotionally fragile, finally began to open up to Margaret. "We didn't know anyone," Martha confessed in a near whisper. "Elijah said the outside world wanted to separate us, hurt us. We could only trust each other. He told us we were special, that our blood was pure." Though Martha still avoided explicitly admitting the paternity, her words and emotions made the situation clear. Meanwhile, the documentary investigation gained a significant advance. The team located a traveling pastor, Reverend Samuel Miller, who had kept a detailed diary of his visits to the Ozark communities. An entry from April 1971 was damning. Reverend Miller had returned to the Shelton property and had been physically barred from entering by a hostile Elijah, but saw Martha was in an advanced state of pregnancy. He reported his concerns to the local sheriff, but was told nothing could be done. This diary provided the first contemporary evidence of Martha's pregnancy, decisively corroborating the investigation's suspicions. Another crucial record was found in a Springfield hospital, detailing Martha's 1977 admission under an alias. The records confirmed she had given birth to a boy with multiple health complications and a slight cardiac defect. Coinciding with Jacob's birth, with the new evidence, Judge Ellen Simmons issued a warrant authorizing DNA tests on all Shelton children and adults. The results, obtained months later, were conclusive. Elijah was the biological father, and Martha was the biological mother of all 3 children. Leave a comment now if you believe all cases of family abuse deserve to be investigated, no matter how isolated the community. On December 7, 1982, based on the genetic evidence and testimonials, Elijah Shelton was formally accused of incest. Martha was considered a victim due to prolonged psychological coercion and did not face criminal charges. Elijah Shelton's trial began in the Shannon County Court, attracting regional media attention. The defense argued that Elijah's extreme isolation and the dysfunctional environment in which he was raised had compromised his ability to discern basic social and moral norms. His public defender argued that Elijah was merely the product of isolation generations. The prosecution, however, maintained that Elijah deliberately hid the true nature of his relationship. They presented evidence that he had the capacity to conduct business and interact with the community when necessary. This was not the action of someone unable to distinguish right from wrong, but someone deliberately constructing an alternative reality. Martha Shelton testified to closed doors, revealing a pattern of psychological manipulation that began after her parents' death. Elijah had convinced her that the outside world was hostile and that their blood was special and pure. After years alone with him, I started to believe, she confessed. Dr. Richard Foster, a psychiatrist, confirmed that extreme isolation can radically distort a person's perception of what is acceptable, creating an alternative reality. The trial also highlighted a monumental failure of local institutions. Testimony confirmed that concerns had been raised by at least 3 different people over the years: the Reverend Miller, Sarah Gankins, and a store employee, but in neither case was proper follow-up conducted. This exposed systemic failures in monitoring isolated communities and protecting the vulnerable in remote rural areas. The jury considered Elijah Shelton guilty of incest, but recommended leniency. Judge Simmons sentenced him to 3 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months, plus compulsory psychological treatment. In her final statement, Judge Simmons declared, "This case represents a collective failure, not just of the defendant, but of a society that allows entire families to be set aside by our protection and support systems. Geographical isolation should not mean institutional abandonment." The court ordered the children to remain temporarily in state custody while Martha received intensive psychological treatment, with the goal of family reunification. Following the verdict, the children began receiving formal education and medical treatment. Comprehensive genetic tests revealed that all 3 children were carriers of multiple genetic anomalies, resulting from the generational endogamy. Jacob, the youngest, suffered from Alport syndrome and multiple complications that would require care for a lifetime. Elijah Shelton served 22 months before being released on parole. Martha, after 2 years of intensive care, regained custody of the children and moved to a small house on the outskirts of West Plains, where they could continue their schooling and medical treatment. She earned her GED and got a job as a library assistant. The Shelton case triggered significant legal changes. The Shelton Law, approved by the state legislature, established more rigorous protocols for monitoring families in isolated areas, including regular visits from social workers and wellness checks for all children, regardless of formal complaints. The children, against all odds, demonstrated incredible resilience. Thomas, the eldest, surpassed the adversities of his childhood, graduated, and dedicated his career to social service, helping vulnerable children. Sodi found stability as an artist and artisan. Jacob, despite his physical and cognitive limitations, conquered a semi-independent life and became an advocate for the rights of people with disabilities. In 2002, 20 years after her initial discovery, Margaret Wilson, then retired, reflected on the case. "What's most impressive is looking back," she said, "is how something so extreme could happen practically in sight of all. It makes us think how many other similar cases exist, hidden in remote valleys, or the view of all, hoping someone pays attention." The Shelton property, abandoned for years, eventually collapsed, but the earth remains a silent reminder of how extreme isolation can distort realities and perpetuate damaging cycles for generations. The Shelton case remains an iconic study, illustrating the complex intersection between geographic isolation, institutional failure, and the catastrophic effects of endogamy. If you have watched this far, it is because you care about these cases that mark families forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched here so that we know who truly cares about the search for the truth." Do not forget to like this video, share it with others who value understanding the complexities of human nature. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now to follow more investigations that make us reflect on our collective responsibility.